Just a few days to go now for the Pran Pratishthan ceremony of the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. And our special focus on the Ayodhya moment continues. I'm Barkha Dutt, here with the Mojo story. The Ayodhya moment, will it be a moment of healing and unity? Or will it be a moment that splits politics at least wide open? The opposition is divided. The opposition members are discussing and conferring amongst themselves as the Congress party rejects the invitation. Two of the four Shankaracharyas have also made comments critical of the timing. But for the rest of the country, there is unprecedented fervor. Some would say also a kind of emotional hysteria. For the BJP, this is a culmination of a decades-long movement. And the Prime Minister will be personally presiding over ceremonies. The Prime Minister has asked all Indians to light a diya to mark the day as if it were a second Diwali. Flights are jam-packed, including special flights. There is no space left in hotels in Ayodhya. Amitabh Bachchan is reported to have purchased a house in Ayodhya, according to the newspapers this morning. And the Prime Minister is appealing that Ayodhya simply doesn't have room for all the millions of Indians who may want to visit it on the day of the Pran Pratishthan. So do please come, but come later and light a diya that day. Now, introducing our newsmaker today is the best-selling author, including of the Ram Chandra Series, Amish Tripathi. He's also a religious philosopher. He's a documentary filmmaker. He's also been the director of the Nehru Center in London. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Amish. And let me start by asking you, as somebody who, in a sense, was a man before his times, and what I mean by that is all of your books, maybe 20 years ago, nobody sort of knew the bestseller sort of moment that they would trigger in the world of popular literature. And, you recognized very early on what this was as a sentiment, not just as a religious moment, but also as a cultural moment, a literary moment. Now that it's finally happening, what does it mean to you personally?
Firstly, thank you for the compliments, and I'd love to accept some of them, that I was this brilliant guy who saw things happening before others did. But honestly, that wouldn't actually be the truth. I just happened to be lucky to be there at the right place at the right time. By nature, I am a religious person. I grew up in a very deeply religious and traditional family. But my parents were educated in the Hindi medium. Our generation was the first generation in our entire extended family. All of us, we were the first ones to be educated in English. So we essentially had, a foot on both boats, if you will, in the traditional India and in the modernizing India as well. And to me, as someone who has very deep roots in the traditional India, our family is essentially from Kashi, my father's family. This was a very, very, this is what is happening today. An extremely inspiring and deep cultural moment. Something like this hasn't happened in human history, where a pagan idol worshipping culture has revived like this. There has been only a one-way movement over the last 2000 years, where essentially pagan idol worshipping cultures slowly die or are killed off. This is a very significant moment. One can't deny that.
Talk a little bit about some of the debate around the Pran Pratishthan. And I ask you this because I think I heard you say in another conversation that your grandfather actually has performed or presided over some of these ceremonies. Now, two of the four Shankaracharyas, and there's some confusion about the position of the other two, so I'm confining my comments to the two that I've read in the media. They say that this timing, ये timing सही नहीं है. मंदिर को पूरा complete हो जाना चाहिए, and only then should this ceremony take place. In fact, one of the Shankaracharyas said that it's like, it's like a body without the heads and the eyes, and he feels कि ये पहले पूरा एक तरह से बन जाता, and तब ये ठीक होता ceremony करना. What would you say to that?
Look, Barkha, at the beginning, I must clarify. Look, I'm a Shaivite. We of course, we respect all religions, all gods, but our family, we are essentially a Shaivite family. We are Lord Shiva devotees. And Hinduism, there are three broad groups. There are many other groups, but three biggest groups are Lord Shiva devotees, Vishnu devotees, Vaishnavas, among which Lord Ram is, of course, and Shaktas, goddess worshippers. So for us Shaivites, the institution of the Shankaracharya ji is extremely important. So whatever I say from now, I want to say I'm saying this with complete and utter respect for the institution of the Shankaracharya ji. They represent Adi Shankaracharya, and for us Shaivites particularly, it's a very very important institution. We've had the honor at our home at in when we used to live in Odisha, Western Odisha, a small place called Kanspal. It was among the Naxal infected areas at that time. When the Shankaracharya ji of Dwarka had actually come to our home, we've had that honor, and you don't know what it means for a Shaivite. So I'm just giving this background, and I'm saying with complete respect towards the Shankaracharya, to the two Shankaracharyas who opposed it, how it used to happen from what I've understood from my grandfather, who was a Pandit. Remember, many ancient temples actually would be built over decades, right? So the ceremonies that would happen would actually be spread out. The first major ceremony was when the Garbhagriha would be marked out, right? And then the second major ceremony would happen was when the Garbhagriha, the Sanctum Sanctorum, would be built, which meant the roof, the doors, all the walls, all that has been built. And at that time, then the Vigraha, the Murti, the idol of the main god, would be placed out there. The Pran Pratishtha would be done. Rest of the temple complex work would continue. Remember, it would take decades in those days. And there aren't too many ancient temples in North India. The real ancient temples are now, frankly, standing only in the south, and particularly in Tamil Nadu, Kerala. So if you've been to all those ancient temples, there's a main temple in the north. There are many minor temples across, right? So the Chidambaram ji would of course have Lord Shiva's temple in the center, but it would have minor temples to Lord Vishnu, Mata, all of them all around, and the entire complex would take decades to get built. And only once the entire complex was complete, the Purna Kalasha would be placed on top of the spire, on top of the Shikhara. So as long as the Garbha Griha is complete, the Pran Pratishtha can be done. This is my understanding from my Pandit grandfather. Remember, one of the ways to look at a temple is it's the house of the god, right? That's why you do a Pran Pratishtha at that time. Unlike a mosque or a church, which is a place to just worship, this is actually the house of the main god. So think of your Grah Pravesh, all right? Now, many of us in big cities, we live in flats. But in smaller towns, you still have those independent houses, right? When the main house, when the first floor has been built or the roof has been put on the ground floor, you can do a Grah Pravesh. The rest of the construction will happen. In a way, and not exactly, but in a way, it's kind of similar to that. As long as the Garbha Griha is complete, you can do the Pran Pratishtha.
That's interesting. But do you think that the trust should make more of an effort to reach out to the two Shankaracharyas, or do you think they have to just respect their position and move on?
That's not for me to comment, but I always advocate discussions and debates and respectful discussions and debates. And I'm saying again, I'm a Shaivite. So for us, the institution of the Shankaracharya, irrespective of the individuals, it represents the Adi Shankaracharya ji. So we have complete respect for the Shankaracharya ji. But in this case, I'm giving my slightly different view based on what I've learned from my family and grandfather.
Now, one of the very moving responses came from Iqbal Ansari. Iqbal Ansari was a litigant
One of the
in
litigants.
what was then called the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi dispute. And then, of course, the Supreme Court verdict comes and this moment is happening. And I was talking to him and I said, "Aap jayenge?" He said, "Hum zarur jayenge." I said, "Acha, aap to litigant the." So he said, देखिए, सुप्रीम कोर्ट का वर्डिक्ट आ चुका है, किसी भी मुसलमान ने अयोध्या में इसको अपोज नहीं किया है, बल्कि देश में, in his understanding, no Indian Muslim has spoken against this moment. And he said, मोदी जी हमारे मेहमान हैं जब वो अयोध्या आती है, ये हमारी गंगा जमुना तहजीब है. I quote this to you because this has also been an issue that has divided politics. It has exposed fault lines. The demolition of what was then the Babri Masjid, L.K. Advani called it the saddest day of his life. How do we take a moment like this and make it not a day for Hindus, but a day for all Indians?
No, I have complete respect for what Iqbal Saab said, and to me, it truly represents what what India is. As you know, Barkha, I've been a part of a team which is working on a documentary on the Ram Janmabhoomi ji, and the team which has made this together. One of the things we decided is in this there is no left wing or right wing. There is only the Ram wing. Yeah, that's the way we are seeing it. And KK Mohammed Saab, who's one of the archaeologists whose work actually helped prove that there was indeed a temple, and more specifically a Ram temple out there. He had said so beautifully that, I mean, I'm paraphrasing him. He told us during the documentary while I was speaking to him that, look, I'm an Indian Muslim, and Babar and Mir Baki were foreigners. They're from Uzbekistan. I have nothing to do with them, you know. And to me, this truly shows what Hindus and Muslims can live together as. And this is, I think, what Lord Ram would expect, of us. Those who say that Hindus think in a particular way, I'd encourage you to read, the Pew survey, which had come out in 2020, where they'd asked Hindus, "Are you willing to worship at the worship places of other religions, not just Hindu temples?" Over 90% said yes. Then they asked, Muslims and Christians, that do you believe in the concept of karma and dharma, which is a Hindu concept. 90% said yes. There is, I think there is a public, unfortunate debate that happens in some TV channels, and where it's set up more like a gladiatorial match, where truly Ram Banai Jodi, left wing extremists, right wing extremists, they feed each other.
Yeah.
And look, I don't blame politicians. I have respect for Indian politicians. India is not an easy country to manage. And look, they have to do what they have to do to get votes. But at least those of us who are not in politics must aim for unity. This is, of course, a Hindu temple. Lord Ram is a Hindu god, but Lord Ram belongs to all Indians. And what Iqbal Saab said to me shows what Indian Muslims think. What KK
In
Mohammed
fact, you
Saab
reference you
shows
reference
what.
that Pew survey. So our producers just pulled it up, and I think it's worth reading out that most Indians of all religions surveyed believed in karma.
Hmm.
The idea that people will reap the benefits of their good deeds. This
Yeah,
includes roughly three-quarters of Hindus and Muslims and Jains. So
yeah,
basically, 77% of all faiths polled
yeah. Believe
believed in
this.
this idea.
In fact, they asked, if I remember correctly, they asked Muslims, "Do you believe that all religions are true?" If this question was asked in Pakistan, perhaps only 2-3% of Muslims would say yes. But in India, vast majority of Indian Muslims said yes, all religions are true. This is what we must remember. And to me, Lord Ram's temple being rebuilt is, it's not a Hindu Muslim. It wasn't a Hindu Muslim fight. It was actually an Indian foreigner fight. Babar was a foreigner. He refused to even be buried in India, right? It was one of his conditions on his death. This is an Indian moment.
Yeah, I think it's very important, but because the comments you make about Babur, the worry is that that reference today can become a kind of dog whistle to smear Indian Muslims as outsiders, and that is what has to be avoided at all costs. You would agree, I'm sure.
Barkha, this, one again, our history is unfortunately not taught to us well. And I think our establishment historians made a mistake in some of the things that they did. If the British colonial rule is not called Christian rule, why the hell is Turkic colonial rule called Islamic rule? Okay. Bollywood adds to the confusion because we think that Akbar looked like Prithviraj Kapoor, or Babar looked like Ranveer Singh. Sorry, Alauddin Khilji looked like Ranveer Singh. And if you notice in our movies, they are shown as speaking Urdu. They did not speak Urdu. Urdu is our language. It's an Indian language. They would have
Yeah,
spoken Turkic or Farsi. We wouldn't have understood anything
that's
of
right.
what they were saying. We are clear in our minds that the British were foreigners. We are not clear in our minds that the Turks were also foreigners. And one of the things that is missed out in our history books, that the Indian Muslims, they were called, Hinduana Muslims. Not, these days they're called Pasmanda Muslims, were as oppressed by the Turkic invaders as the Indian Hindus were. Do you know that in Agra, there were some Hindus who were allowed. A few Rajput Hindus would be allowed. Pasmanda Muslims weren't allowed into Agra. This has been spoken of by I think there's a Pasmanda Muslim scholar called Faiz Hamid who said that. So we must be clear in our minds. This is not a Hindu-Muslim issue. This is an Indian foreigner issue. And of course, Lord Ram is a Hindu god, but Lord Ram represents all 140 crore Indians, all 1.4 billion of us.
There is a renewed debate around secularism for this age, for a modern country, a diverse country. Our diversity is our badge of honor, our distinctiveness. What should secularism look like today? The Congress, and I know you won't comment on party politics, I'm quoting this in the context of the secularism debate. Some Congress leaders, in their decision to not attend the Mandir Pratishta, the ceremony, they said maybe this is a return to Nehruvian secularism. The BJP has jumped on it and called them a Ram Virodhi party. There are examples being quoted about the debate that took place between Jawaharlal Nehru and President Rajendra Prasad over the Somnath Mandir. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, what does secularism look like in a country as diverse as ours?
Barkha, I think at a deeper level, there's a lot of confusion in our society and, frankly, our state. From 1947 onwards, the original constitution, Dr. Ambedkar's drafting committee, there was actually a debate on the inclusion of the word secularism, and
it came in the 1970s. Yes, it was
yeah,
added
it came
in
during the
1970s.
emergency era, and in
Yes.
fact, there was a debate, and Dr. Ambedkar had given reasons for why socialism was not included, for why secularism was not included. Look, the Western conception of secularism emerged because of their historical baggage. It was essentially a rebellion by those fighting for reason and science against the dominance of the church. That's where the secular concept emerged. The separation of the church and the state. Our state is honestly, since the early days, has been a little confused, because if you say that religion is a personal matter and that religion and state should be separate, why in God's name does the Indian state control Hindu temples, so many Hindu temples, and appropriates their land, their wealth to fund state deficits, right? But legally, the state is not allowed to touch Christian churches, Muslim mosques, or Sikh gurudwaras. This is not secularism. Similarly, now this is of course unfair to Hinduism, but on the other hand, you can claim that Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists get tax benefits, which Christians and Muslims don't. This is unfair because of the undivided family law. This is unfair to Christians and Muslims.
That's right.
Personal laws are decided on on religions. There are some states within India which do not see consummation of child marriage as statutory rape. For some religious groups. Now, this is again a part of, and I as a liberal would say, boss, if you're consummating a marriage with a girl who's under 18, I'm sorry, it's statutory rape.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, so our state has actually not been secular, and I think the problem is that at some levels we are trying to apply French and European principles to a country that is radically different, right? I think what we need is, in a society itself, we need pluralism rather than secularism, which means I'm a very proud Hindu. I've never hidden it from even in 2010 when my first book was published, when it wasn't fashionable to say so. I would say I'm a proud Hindu, right? But from that time till now, I also say I respect all other religions. I just said it right now in this interview as well. That is pluralism. It's not the strict Western secularism. Then how should the state be? The state, I would suggest that we should have the Chanakyan approach to a state, which is that the state will do only very few things. It will not get involved in matters that the society should look at. But those few things, the state will have a similar law for everyone. So the state gets involved in too many things. The Indian state.
So you are making a case in a way for secular law. I'm using the word secular,
yes.
But secular laws, secular family laws.
The state should not differentiate between different religious groups, but to do that, the state must restrict itself to a few things that only the state can do. The rest of the things, how temples should be run, it's a society's job. What does the state
Yeah,
have to do with it?
but
Right?
you say this with the awareness that that a uniform civil code will of course take away the personal laws of Muslims and Christians, but it will also alter certain Hindu customs. For example, a marriage within, within the family. What I mean is, among cousins, or sometimes, like you know that this happens in southern India
Yeah.
in particular,
In
right? So
some parts, but
in
otherwise
some
within
parts,
same Gotras, it's quite rare among Hindus. But yes, and you're right. In some
yes.
parts, it does happen.
So you believe, as I understand it, that we need pluralism, not secularism. We can't have this sanitized erasure, because in our country, religion is intermixed with culture to a degree that it isn't uh,
Absolutely,
in other
and we are
countries.
applying French principles to here, and that was it grew emerged in a different atmosphere. Now, the specific thing that you said, what ideally should happen, the state should get involved when there's a dispute, okay, between
Yeah.
a husband and a wife, for example, in divorce. And what are the paradigms in which the state will get involved? A simple secular law. If there is no dispute, then what the society does is up to them, right? Again, that's what I mean by Chanakyan state. A Chanakyan state, by its very principle, if we read Chanakya Niti and Arthashastra, he quotes where he's got his principles from Acharya Chanakya. So from Shukracharya, from Brahaspati ji, and the entire concept is that leave to the society what must be with the society. So, for example, if someone wants a reform on some superstitions, Maharashtra, they have some anti-superstition act. Now, I'm against some superstitions as well, but we should not have the right to go to the state or go to the courts and enforce that. If I want some changes, I have to do the hard work the way it was done in ancient times. Go village to village, talk, convince people, and then change them. The state will not get involved in all this. The state should only get involved in a few things. There's
But
a
what if
law
the
now.
superstition, what if the superstition collides with principles of the Constitution? See, this has been a tussle, right? Sometimes a custom, a belief, a superstition collides with the principles of under Article 14, which is the right to equality. For women in particular, dealing with sometimes religious orthodoxy, sometimes cultural orthodoxy, is a challenge.
Hmm. Very true.
So,
And
so you can't say that the state has nothing to do with it.
now, in this, the key question is, how should reform happen? Reform
Yeah.
has to happen. How should reform happen? Should it be done by society, or should it be enforced by the
Don't
state?
you need
Now,
both?
the,
Don't you need
now
the
the
law to
key thing,
enforce it? Yeah.
in some cases, perhaps, because when it's truly egregious, okay. For example, uh, the girl children being killed in the womb, okay. As you
Yeah.
know, sadly, it happens in such large numbers, sadly across all communities, and sadly, the richer the community, the more it happens, right?
Hmm.
Okay, but if you say that the state will get involved only in some aspects, okay, then that community will say, why aren't you targeting that community, other community then? And then what will naturally happen is that it will move more and more into an expansionary Ashokan state. Do you know that the first state in India, at least from what I'm aware of our history, the first state in India that tried to promote vegetarianism and enforce Dhamma was actually the Ashokan state. Okay, they had Dhamma. It was the equivalent of a promotion of virtue and prevention of vice. Now, what happens with this? Someone else says, "Yeah, you're trying to promote vegetarianism, but I want to promote dairy products. The state should do this too." Now, I'm just giving an example, right? What ends up happening
I
is,
understand what you're saying, but all I'm arguing is that you need a set of universal laws.
true.
I am actually an advocate of the uniform civil code, because I believe that women in particular need to be able to access universal protections across religions. That's all I'm
Absolutely,
arguing. I'm saying you can't
absolutely.
disassociate the state
So now,
totally from
so
reform.
if there's a
Yes.
dispute between a husband and a wife, and they come to the state should not differentiate. Husband wife will be treated equally, all right? But
Yeah.
within a house, you could have some communities which is matrilineal, some
Yeah.
communities which are patrilineal. It has nothing to do with the state then. If you want reform, like for example, I speak for women's rights, okay? I speak for LGBT rights. What I will do is then go through my books, through this thing, try and promote it. That's what I should do.
I
And I should be the
understand. I
marketplace of
understand that
ideas.
social
What should the
reform.
state do?
Sorry, I
Okay.
have a question.
No,
I
go ahead.
understand and I agree with you that social reform is key to change, right? But when there are a few individuals who try and energize the community into that reform, you need the protection of the law of the land that gives you the right to equality. So, in olden days, and you still hear some headlines of, women treated as witches and shunted out. A menstruation stigma still very alive. LGBTQ rights, great example. The triple talaq movement, right? Great example. In the end, both Supreme Court and Parliament needed to buttress the fight by Muslim women. So, what I'm arguing is the state can't be disassociated from the struggle of society to reform itself.
Okay, let's speak on, for example, menstrual purity. Okay,
Yes,
which is one of the
yes.
things that's spoken of. One of the ways to speak of it is use the example of Kamarupa and Kamakhyaji, where actually menstrual blood is seen as sacred. Okay, now that's part of our traditions. Again, this is one of the things that I will speak of. Right.
Mhm.
The question is, where do you draw the line that how much the state can interfere in? Okay. Uh, in real life, you obviously need some balance. Like I gave that example of truly egregious extremism. Like,
Yeah.
in my mind, it's a mass murder of girl children in the womb, right? The state has to get involved. But ideally, if the balance has to be struck, I am very wary of this concept of constitutional morality, okay, where essentially the elite and the state will decide what is moral. Now, in that, what happens?
Moral,
Okay.
yes, but equal? Moral,
Yeah,
yes.
equality, of course.
But
Yes,
what
yes,
about
yes.
equal?
So
Yeah,
the state's laws must respect equality completely.
that's
All
right.
right. But the state should not try and enforce its morality on others, because if you say that at some level the elite and the state says meat eating is good and they try and promote that, now someone else takes over the state and they say vegetarianism is good, then you swing to that thing. Now, if the principle has been established that the state will enforce morality, like in the US, now the state is enforcing a morality that there are 76 genders, right? And you can't take it on, and the state will arrest you, right? If you disagree with that. I don't know about you, but I respectfully have doubts about 76 genders, with complete respect to transgender rights. I'm a Shaivite. In our way, we've always respected transgender rights. But I'm not so sure about 76 genders. Now, I'm willing to have a debate, on this. But if the state says that if you don't agree with 76 genders, you will be fired, you will be jailed, as is happening actually in Canada, uh, is that an area that the state
No,
should
I
get involved
agree.
in?
I agree. I think
Which
I'm
is
just
where
putting
I
in
like
place.
a Chanakyan state, where the state should do a few things that only the state can do, ensure that everyone has the right to speak, protect freedom of expression, so that the society can debate. And most things should be left to the society. Let them debate and sort it.
Now, if I were to ask you, what is the difference between a Chanakyan state and an Ashokan state? Because what I'm picking up here is that the model you prefer is a Chanakyan state, not an Ashokan state. What is the one difference between the two?
Sanjeev Sanyal, a scholar and someone who studied this, had actually said this in a book and in a speech. And then I started reading up on, I'd read a summary of Chanakya Niti. I started reading the original in Arthashastra. Now, the Chanakyan state at its core has a suspicion of the state itself. Okay. So Chanakya had said something very beautiful, that very insightful, that you cannot prevent corruption by state officers, because it's
Hmm.
like trying to stop a fish from drinking water that it's taking in just for breathing. Okay, he says you can't do it. So what you have to do is give them as few opportunities as possible, which means the state should do as little as possible, and only what the state can do, which is what things like law and order, things like building infrastructure, things like defending from external enemies, that only the state can do that exceptionally well. Monopoly on violence, for example, like the Chanakyan state was very clear, under no circumstances will vigilantism be tolerated. Okay, under no circumstances. Only the state will punish, and the state's punishment will be strict and severe and quick. Now, Ashokan state was they'll get involved in everything. The king was putting, was saying you should behave this way, you should do that way, you should do that way.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? The state expands, and it cannot do the core things that it must do well, and it tries and interferes in things that the society should be doing.
So
Like, for
when it comes
example,
to, for
vegetarianism
example,
or meat, right?
yes, yeah.
That's what
Go
the
ahead.
society
First,
should
complete
get
your
on.
point.
It's not
Complete
the
your
state's
point.
job. Right?
It's not the state's job to determine whether you're a vegetarian or a meat eater. That's a great point. Is it the state's job to determine whether you want to marry someone from your faith or someone from another faith? I ask you this in the context of some states that have brought in quote unquote love jihad ordinances.
The state has a right to get involved when someone has been, say, for example, misled, okay, or someone has been cheated, okay. So cheating laws, but outside of that, no, the state should not get involved.
So you're not a fan of
So say
the
for
love jihad,
example, so
the
say
love
for
jihad
example,
debate.
so say for example, someone comes to a woman and pretends to be another from another religion, which
Yeah,
he's not,
yeah,
and then he gets married, and then suddenly he kind of breaks that this is it, okay, that I'm actually from other religion. That is cheating. So the state has to get involved, right?
yeah.
But if a woman decides of her own free will, or a man decides of her own free will, right? Then it's up to them. Now, but I, as an individual, as a society person, what do I think true love is? When actually, if I'm marrying someone from another religion, I don't expect that person to accept my religion, and I'm not going to change mine for that. Like, for example, my wife is a Jain, right? I don't expect her to, and she won't expect me to
I
do
mean,
this,
I'm
right?
a fan of strengthening the
This
Special
is
Marriage Act where neither person has to change
yeah.
their religion.
This is mutual respect, right? But
Yes.
this is my personal view, and I can speak of it at a societal level. What should the
Yeah.
state do if a woman has been cheated, right? Then it's wrong. Then the state needs to get involved, right?
Okay. Finally, I have a philosophical question. I remember Javed Akhtar, who's an atheist, was once in a program that I was moderating, and he said to, I forget who, unfortunately, he said to somebody, he said, आप ध्यान रखिएगा कि आप हमारे जैसे ना बन जाएं. What he was trying to say is that Hinduism's great distinctiveness, it's not codified. It doesn't have this one set of do's and don'ts. It doesn't have one book as the centrality of what defines it, right? And what he was arguing, although he's not a believer, and therefore you can question why was he arguing it, but as a thought experiment, he was arguing that Hinduism needs to protect its essence, and its essence is this open argumentative spirit, from an attempt to flatten it, codify it, come up with sets of do's and don'ts. What do you say about that?
Very interesting point. Um, you have to see this from a larger historical perspective. Um, Many pagan idol worshipping cultures died out, right? And actually, practically all of them. We are among the few who are still around, right? From what you would call the one truth religions, right?
Yeah.
Christianity, Islam, and Marxism. Marxism is also, frankly, a one truth religion. Um, and all the pagan idol worshipping cultures were at their core about respect for multiple truths and mutual respect, right? Now, here is a challenge that Karl Popper had stated, that how do you keep tolerance alive when it is under attack by intolerance? Because if you tolerate the intolerant, then tolerance will die out, right? But if you become intolerant to defend yourself from the intolerant, then also tolerance will die out, right? Um, and this is a challenge that the ancient ways have to grapple with, right? Like I said, I don't think Indian Islam or Indian Christianity behaves this way. But do American evangelists, I'm sure you've heard of the Joshua Project, right? Which calls, India among the axis of the devil, which needs to be converted to save us. I'm like, I mean, seriously, you
Yeah,
know.
but that's not every
Now,
American Christian. I mean,
no, of course not. But there's tons of money. That is not every American Christian, of course, but there's tons of money which goes into that by American evangelists. In Pakistan, for example, the Hindu, Christian, Sikh minority were around 8.5% in 47, down to 1.5% now. Whereas in India, the Muslim minority has gone up from 8% to 14%. In Nepal, the minorities have gone up again. Actually, India and Nepal, by the way, are the only countries in the Indian subcontinent where the minority proportion has gone
But
up in the last
but
75
you know,
years.
this
Now, what's the
populism.
point I'm trying to make? What's the point I'm
Sorry,
trying to make?
I just want to
Sure.
clarify because it's important that S.Y. Qureshi's book looks at these numbers in great details to call out one myth that sometimes used to divide Hindus and Muslims, that Muslims are not going to outnumber or overtake
Oh, no,
Hindus in
yeah,
this
no, no, I'm
country.
not saying
Yes,
that.
I
I'm not
just
saying that.
wanted to, yes,
No, no. My comment wasn't about Muslims outnumbering. My
yes,
comment was what was the attitude of the Hindu majority in India and Nepal as compared to, let's be honest, other countries in the region where minorities have been wiped out, right?
yeah.
You cannot have right to equality or right to your religion if you don't have the right to live. If you're dead, all those other rights are theoretical, right? Now, the point is, how do you keep this tolerance alive in a world where mutual respect is not necessarily a given, right? So that balance has to be struck, right? That we must ensure that our country does not change, because it's one of the things I keep saying, that I'm no defender of Pakistan, right? But I will argue vehemently with anyone who says Indian Muslims are in any way like Pakistanis. No, they're not. The data doesn't show that, right? And my experience doesn't show that. So, but having said that, if those who are tolerant don't realize that they have to stand up for that tolerance as well, then tolerance will die out. Frankly, one can see it happening in Europe, right?
Mm.
Is free speech really strong in European universities and American universities? The attack on them is from an intolerant form of Marxism, wokeism, right? So there is a very fine balance that has to be struck, and this is the challenge that Karl Popper had very wisely put up. How do you protect tolerance when it is under attack by intolerance? And it's a balance to be struck, because we must not lose the essence of who we are, because then what's the point of surviving, right?
Yeah.
We must be the way our ancestors were. We must be tolerant. But having said that, we have to defend our way of life as well. We must defend freedom of expression. Otherwise, we'll either lose our essence, in which case we'll die out, or we'll get conquered by competing intolerant philosophies, in which case, again, we'll die out.
Well, fascinating conversation, Amish. We could go on, but I think we both should get on to other work as well. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. Thank you so much.
Thank
Delighted
you.
to talk to you, and
Pleasure.
looking forward to the documentary as well as your next projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Take
Bye.
care. Bye. Bye. Mojo's Story has always made a commitment to its viewers to go to where the story is. And as you can see here, we are at the epicenter of the Israel war on Gaza. We are right at the front line, about 1 mile from the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli military gets ready with its tanks and its gunners to begin its final frontal assault that will take troops into Gaza. As we said, we are not like other organizations. We believe in giving you all sides of the story objectively and as much as possible from the ground. And that's exactly what we're doing here, covering the biggest global story today from the epicenter of the war zone. So please, we need your support. Support us, become a Mojo member, subscribe to us, spread the word, and thank you for your support.